and Brian, is that Sun has given us more free hands to do what we want to do. And with me, I need to finish what I believe is one of the most critical pieces for MySQL just now, and that's the engine I'm working on.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Mark Shuttleworth talked last night about Firefox as a model for sort of open source architecture today, and that's something I've talked a lot about, what I've called the architecture of participation. And MySQL had this real breakthrough, I think, with the pluggable storage engine architecture. And you're actually trying to take it even further here with the idea of let's strip the database down into a component. In a system that's architected of a set of components. It's that old original Unix philosophy, which I think is so close to the heart of open source, and everybody working needs to remember that. Do less and then create extensibility mechanisms. Don't build big monolithic pieces of software. And we see, the creeping, monolithic approach that kind of comes in as projects get older, and you guys are, in some sense, kind of going back saying, no, we're figuring out how to do pieces that work together.
I mean, all new features. One of the key early on pieces I made with Drizzle is I decided that first thing is that it's going to be a microkernel. We're going to have a lot less features internally. Any kind of new feature is going to have to come through some form of an interface. In fact, if you want to add an interface for all the code for the interface, you have to reduce the main server by at least that amount of code in itself. So the idea is make it smaller, push it smaller, and actually push things more out towards the edge and less towards the center.
Hey, I was thinking we should open this to Q&A from the audience. So if you guys want to queue up at microphones, feel free if you have questions for Brian or Monty. And we can do that. So kind of meanwhile, I guess I wanted to do something it's a little bit like that show Inside the Actor's Studio where I just asked for reactions. So quickly, what do you think about Google?
So what do I think about Google? I'm happy that they are making more of their data exportable. I think that is good. When I look at Google's Apps Engine, I have this, in the back of my head, I'm kind of wondering if they're turning the entire world into their own favorite 20% project by getting everybody to put their apps there. So I think that's kind of an extension of that philosophy.
Monty?
I'm really happy with Google that they're participating in open source. I'm just very little like you that after some time there will be nothing else than Google and we need alternatives.
Okay, how about Amazon? Any reactions to Amazon as a company in today's market?
I think Amazon's an interesting position because they've always been a fairly secretive company, and they've suddenly been pushed out into the, out based on their own innovation. I mean, nobody even had really thought about Amazon. When I went and started first talking about EC2 and S3, and I talked to at the time the VP of engineering at Google, and I was at his house and I was going through some notes, and he goes, "What's this Amazon stuff?" And it was interesting how, at the very beginning of that, how little anybody had ever thought of Amazon at all in that marketplace. And now it's really obvious that they're both the innovators and the leaders in that area of innovation.
Just amazing, but they're good.
Yeah. How about Microsoft? What do you guys think about Microsoft in today's market?
I see less and less of Microsoft, which I think is a good thing.
At this point, they're irrelevant.
So, I mean, I'm sorry for any people from Microsoft in the audience. I hope that you are going to prove these guys wrong because it's great to have, lots of vibrant competition. But it's just interesting sort of zeitgeist. How about Apple? What do you guys think about Apple?
I'm more afraid for Apple than Microsoft. They are just too locked in.
Yeah. It's kind of the I really want a new iPhone, and at the same token, I'm really hoping Google gets Android out fast enough so that it works well enough that I can use it. But I got to say, the iPhone looks pretty damn good.
Why can't open source do anything as insanely great as the iPhone?
Hey, well, that's a good question. Why can't open source do anything as insanely great as the iPhone? Well, I'm hoping, there's a lot of stirrings of activity. We see, Firefox for mobile. We do see, Android. We do see Moblin. We do see OpenMoko. And by the way, OpenMoko, just something that really brings home the power of open source is that the first really interesting OpenMoko device is not a phone. It's the Dash internet-connected GPS. And that shows how powerful it is when you put source out. Somebody can do something you don't expect. Who would have thought the first popular consumer device would be an in-car GPS coming out of that project? Open source made that possible. Back there, can you say your name? I can't see you.
Michael Tiemann.
Oh, Michael, I agree. You're totally in shadow with your hat. And,
sorry about that.
Yeah.
So obviously in my day job at Red Hat, we have a little bit of experience of acquiring open source companies and seeing what does and doesn't work. And my question for you guys is, now that you're sort of 6 months in, it's a two-part question. One is, what are the cool things that you think MySQL will be able to do, on the Sun field, and what are the cool things that Sun can do on the MySQL field that we might be talking about in a year? That's sort of part one. And part two is, do you see this combination of DNA being more important on things that are happening inside the Sun shell, or more important for the outside world?
So the thing that became very apparent within like the first week of the acquisition was the concept of how MySQL engineers expect companies to work. And behavior-wise, this is a lot of what I call having good table manners when dealing with open source projects. And what the Sun thought is how developers should work with other open source projects were very, very different. And so from that, you could have seen a huge clash of cultures. But in our case, it actually has turned out that our pushing of this is what our DNA believes and how companies should behave with other open source projects and how IP rights should work and how you should encourage developers has actually created a set of steps of revolution inside of Sun where, a few days ago I got to see looking at the first draft of, how Sun is going to start allowing employees to contribute to open source projects. And, one of the biggest belligerents we have internally is the head of the Linux Australia, Stuart Smith. And he was the first one to respond with, which was amazement of how good it looked. And it's been amazing to see how Sun has actually been, our DNA, which is very small. I mean, we're 300-400 people compared to a 30,000 some odd person company, and how fast our DNA has been pushing in that direction to have Sun rethink about how it actually works with open source.